Hi. So in this lecture we want to talk about object-oriented programming, right? So object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm, is basically a way of doing programming which is extremely useful and is the default way whenever you are doing any kind of development, right? If you're building websites, if you're building Android applications, whatever you are doing, you will be doing, you'll be writing code using object-oriented programming. So before we talk about what exactly is object-oriented programming, I think it's important to understand why do we need something like this, right? So the basic idea here is that we want that our code should be very similar to the way we speak or the way we communicate with others in real life. Okay, so the way you talk to others is a very object-oriented way. You will talk about, hey, there is a chair, you need to do something about it, right? So there is a person who I'm talking to and I'm asking them to do something about another object. So I'm saying that the person is an object, right? So whenever we are writing code, or whenever we are talking about real life, we are going to think of people as object, animals as object, table, chair, laptop, camera, all of these things are objects, right? So the way you will do is you are asking an object, which happens to be a human, that hey, do something for me, in which you need to do something about another object, right? So for example, if I just ask somebody to give me my laptop, that basically means I'm asking an object to do something for me, in which basically they need to do something about an object. So it'll be more clear when you understand how exactly we can achieve it. But the basic idea is, let's say that we are let's say we are writing code for a e-learning company, and in this company we are writing code where students are able to take admission into batches. So you will have multiple batches, right? And you will have multiple students. So what I want is, if a student is taking admission in a batch, then my code should look something like this. Batch dot give admission, it takes a student from us, right? So now if you look at this line, it's absolutely clear what this line is going to do, right? So here what is happening, this is an object, right? There's not a physical object. Like if I talk about that there is this e-learning company which has a lot of batches, then each batch I'm calling that batch as an object. So you have one object which we are calling a batch, and this has some functionality where you can say, hey, give admission to, and you are passing a student to it, right? Looks like a function, give admission, and it's taking an argument student from us. So our code should basically look like this. Don't worry about how we will achieve it. We will learn all of that. But the idea is, this is why we need object-oriented programming. With the basic idea behind it, that my code, when I read it, it should be very obvious what I'm trying to do, and it should be very similar to the way generally we speak with each other, the way we communicate in real life. Okay. So in case of object-oriented programming, this is why we need object-oriented programming. But in case of object-oriented programming, the two main concepts that we'll be using is basically classes and objects. These are two main concepts that we will be using everywhere, right? So as you saw, I wanted to create an object called batch, right? And I wanted to create an object called student. Now, if I'm thinking of an e-learning solution, right, a company which has a lot of batches and each batch will have a lot of students, will they have only one batch? No, they will not have only one batch. They will have multiple batches. So they will not be just batch, they might be a batch CPP, they might be a batch Java, they might be a batch Python, and so on. There might be a lot of batches, right? And there will be a lot of students as well. Now all these batches will be very similar. They will have similar kind of data with them, they will have similar kind of functionality, right? So they will be very similar to each other. Similarly, students, each student will have a name, each student might have a roll number, and so on, right? So students will be similar as well. So the way we will structure our code is generally we will create a class. Class is nothing but just a template on how will my objects look like. So I'll have a class for batch. So there'll be a batch class. There'll be a student class, right? There'll be a batch class, there'll be a student class. Now, as you saw earlier, we would want that these objects have some functionality. They should be able to do some work for us. So generally objects will have functionality. They will be able to do some work for us. They will also have some data, or you can say attributes. As I said, student will have a name, roll number, that's data. But if I want to say, student, do this assignment, now that's a functionality. I want the student to do something for me. That's not just data. So generally my objects will have two type of things, functionality and data. Okay, so these are the two things that my objects will generally have. And all these students will have similar functionality and similar kind of data. All the students should be able to do their assignments. All the students should have their name. All the students should have their roll number. Similarly, all the batches should be able to take students for admission. All the batches should have schedule for how long the batch is, when does it start, when does it end. All those properties, all that data should be with batches. So what we will do is, we will create a template batch. Okay. And whenever you need a new batch, you will use this template to create that new batch. Okay. See, one option is that I want to create batch CPP. Now when I'm creating batch CPP, I'll say, hey, I want to create a batch CPP and this should have a start date. This should have a function take admission. This should have an end date. This should have so and so on, so many properties and so many functionalities. And when I create batch Java, then I'll repeat this. Hey, batch Java should have a start date. Batch Java should have a function take admission. It should have an end date and so on. So that's an option that I can go ahead with. But the problem with that is that every time I create a batch, I need to mention what all attributes, what all data it should have, and what all functionality it should have. I don't want to do that. What I want is that I'll define it once, that how does a batch looks like? What are the properties of a batch? What are the functionalities of a batch? And once I have done that, I do not want to repeat that every time I want to create a new batch. So I should be able to simply create a new batch by using some code, some syntax, without saying that these are all the data points, these are all the functionality that I need in my this particular batch. Okay, so what is a class? Class is basically a template which will tell you what data, what kind of functionality such objects should have. Okay, so this is a template. What is an object? Object is basically an instance of this class. So in our code we will create a class. Now whenever you need an instance of this class, you will have to find a way to create an object of that class, right? So we create a template once. You need batch 1. Hey, you create a batch 1 by using this template and you will have all the same data points, all the same functionality. You want another batch? Sure, go ahead, create batch 2. Now this is a class which is only one, but you have multiple objects of the same class. So these individual instances are called objects and this template is called a class. Okay, that's what we will use to write code in object-oriented programming. Okay, so in the next session we'll create a sample class and we'll see how we can create objects from that class. That should give you a lot of clarity, but the basic idea is that we want our code very, very intuitive. We want it to be absolutely intuitive, where we are able to say stuff like batch dot take admission and pass a student to it, right? As if your code starts looking like that, I think it will be much more readable. It will be a lot more intuitive as well. Okay, so that's what we want to achieve, and from the next session we'll start looking at how can we achieve that. Okay, perfect. Thank you.